Get ready to uncover groundbreaking ideas, discover the hidden challenges, and explore the untapped potential of marketing in the digital age. This is FairPlay with Arun Kumar, the podcast that takes you on a journey into the impact of data and technology in marketing. Here's Arun.
My guest this week is pioneering brand architect, author, and TEDx speaker Mitch Duckler. As a renowned consultant, he has revolutionized customer engagement for iconic brands like ExxonMobil, Caterpillar, and Hyatt across his 3 decades at marketing titans like Unilever and Coca-Cola. And I should also mention that he has a lot of involvement with the ANA, which I personally love as an organization. And his latest book, The Future Ready Brand, provides a roadmap for navigating disruptions, reshaping the brand world. In his book, Mitch reveals visionary strategies from the world's most influential brands to future-proof your organization. You could almost call him a CMO whisperer. Mitch, welcome to FairPlay.
Thank you, Arun. Great to be here.
So, Mitch, I'm really excited about both of us doing this for very selfish reasons, because I know you have a great book coming out, The Future Ready Brand, which is going to get published on May 14th. It's being published by Forbes. And guess what? My book, The Data Deluge, Making Marketing Better for Brands and People, is also getting published by Forbes on May 14th. What are the chances of that? So I'm really, really glad that we're having this conversation because I feel like both these books have an intersection point here or there.
Yeah, it certainly sounds that way. A number of my the chapters in my book are about technology and specifically about AI. So interested to hear about your book as well.
Cool. So let's dive into your book, actually. I think it's a good jump off point for our conversation. So in your first book, The Indispensable Brand, you made a very compelling case for why brands need to do a lot more to differentiate themselves than what they were currently doing at that point in time. This book seems to focus a little bit more on broader societal and technological forces. So I just want to get your idea on what was the reason for the change in focus? What were you seeing that made you write this book?
Certainly a lot of the concepts of the first book, The Indispensable Brand, apply here. But what we've all been noticing, and I think you can attest to as well, is that there's been a lot of changes, especially in the area of technology, emerging technology that are impacting the world of brand and marketing. And in particular, things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive analytics, also extended reality and metaverse, and then certainly Web3 and blockchain. And these are all having a very profound impact on how brands are positioned, how offers are constructed and brand experiences delivered. And then they're impacting things like, and there's chapters on each of these in the book, things like content marketing, gamification, influencer marketing, and so forth. So I'm not necessarily an expert on any one of these areas. So what I did was I went out and I talked to the people who are, right? I talked to the chief marketing officers of over 40 companies, mostly Fortune 500, and got their thoughts on how these different areas, these different emerging technologies are impacting their jobs and how they're handling them and how they're leveraging them for competitive advantage.
And one of the things that you spoke about there was, I think, linked to brand purpose. And I've heard this quite a lot, right? That a lot of people talk about purpose-driven marketing. They talk about what is the purpose of the brand. And it's also about having a clear purpose that is so critical for brands today. So in your conversations with CMOs, what about brand purpose did you dive into? And do you feel like we're moving towards that space where people have a better understanding of defining purposes of brands? There's also so much of a polarized environment right now that brands, sometimes end up getting caught in the crossfire between different sections of society. So how do you define brand purpose, or how do you think CMOs are defining brand purpose for themselves?
I would say, first of all, that when I reached out to the CMOs, we talked about each of the 9 different topics in the book and asked them which ones they'd be interested in talking to. And I would say purpose was one that really rose to the top. I'd say arguably was the most often chosen topic for that they wanted to speak on. And so it certainly isn't anything new. But basically, the way I would define it, and we talk about this in the book, is that it is why you do what you do, right? And it's more than just making money, right? It's more than just about earnings and shareholder value and so forth. But what is it that drives your company to do what it does in the marketplace, right? Why do you get up in the morning and go to work? And one of the things that's kind of interesting, I found through the research, and this is actually what came from Harvard, from HBR, Harvard Business Review, is that purpose doesn't necessarily have to be a cause, even though that's what most people associate it with, right? They think that it has to be about climate change or ESG or DE&I, and while a lot of purposes are defined by causes, it can also be defined by your competence, right? What is it that you do better than anybody else, right? And that kind of energizes you. But at the end of the day, Arun, I think what it comes down to is it's this notion of, which I think you've probably heard of, the triple bottom line, right? It's profit, people, and planet. So profit is still very important, that portion of the bottom line will always be critical. Otherwise, you're not going to be in business for very long. But it's necessary, but no longer sufficient. And that's where I think purpose comes in. What are you doing for people? What are you doing for the planet? How are you making the world a better place?
So, since you are talking to CMOs and you are a CMO whisperer, let me ask you this, because I've spoken to a fair amount of people, and there seems to be a differing opinion on what CMOs really feel. And I'd love to take your take on this. So there's one section of people who believe that CMOs are flourishing and that the data that seems to suggest that their tenures are coming down is not really accurate, that some of the biggest brands have, CMOs who've been there for a long time, and therefore it's all fine. And then on the other side, you have the people who constantly cite the fact that CMOs are revolving, that their titles are changing, and that there is an immense amount of pressure on them to demonstrate value. Some have even gone to speculate that with new stuff coming out because of AI, their roles are under even greater threat. How do you see it? I mean, you've spent so much of time with these guys. You've been one yourself. So how do you react to these statements?
Yeah, one thing I would say that was a consistent theme from a number of CMOs, and this particularly came up during conversations around artificial intelligence, is that this is an opportunity for CMOs who are not there yet, right, to really elevate their stature within the organization, get a seat at the so-called strategy table, the ability to use AI to understand markets and consumer behavior, and to model, to use it as a modeling, right? And developing the growth agenda is greater now than ever before, right? And marketers, if they are able to embrace this technology, and by embrace it, they were very clear about saying, look, you don't need to become a data scientist, right? But you need to know the CIO, right? And you need to make him or her your best friend. If you're able to do that, you can increase your level of influence in the organization, significantly, and not just be not under fire, as they're saying, and increasing your tenure, but really being as pivotal in the C-suite as often the CFO and COO are considered.
So since we're talking about AI, which everyone is super interested in, so AI and personalization are a big focus. In fact, the ANA recently organized a conference, a plug for the ANA, really great organization. They got a number of really good folks together, and they did the first ever AI for Marketers conference, which I was lucky to be a part of. And one of the things that kept coming up across multiple brands was, how do we personalize without making the customer feel creepy, and so on. But in your conversations, have you seen any CMOs or brands that you think are ahead of the others and sort of thinking about AI?
First of all, you really hit on one of the key issues, is this conundrum, if you will, that they talked about. Their consumers in particular younger consumers, Gen Z, Gen Y, they are demanding personalization to a much greater extent than any other generation previously. They want brands and brand experiences that are very unique and personalized and customized to them. And yet they are very reluctant to hand over personal data, right? So it's like, okay, give me a personalized experience, but you have to be clairvoyant because I don't want to give you anything that's private, right? So that really is the challenge. And I think one of the themes that kind of came out from these conversations that Seamless are saying, it's going to be very, very important for you to build a trusted relationship with consumers, acquire zero and first party data, so that you're able to do it in a way that isn't invasive to their privacy, right? It's a much more willing and proactive situation. Also, one of the things that some of them talked about was this notion of synthetic data, right? Which can also help get around the privacy issues, right? So it's essentially your data that is artificially generated by a computer, or it's augmented to replace real data, and it gets around some of those, privacy concerns. But without that, that level of personalization will certainly be very difficult. To answer your question around examples, one of the best examples I thought was from my interviews, and it's in the book, is around Sephora. And what the CMO for Sephora talked about is, just their ability to use an infinite amount of data, right? And then, crunch it kind of real time and come up with very personalized recommendations. So for example, he talked about how they have 300 brands and 5,000 products. So as he said, imagine a customer, is looking for skincare products, right? And they have an oily face, and it's very sensitive, and they want some SPF, and they live in Australia, and kind of a dry climate. What would they recommend, right? And that would be very difficult for somebody to do kind of on the fly. But with artificial intelligence, they're able to come up with very specific and personalized recommendations. If they, 2 to 3, and here are 2 or 3 you may want to consider, and let's take a look at these.
You know what, as somebody who gets immensely intimidated by thinking about going into a Sephora, not that any of those products are for me, but when I do manage to step in, it is really intimidating, and it's very hard, and I don't know how the ladies make their decisions. And so that seems like a use case straight out of heaven, at least for people like me, and I'm sure the ladies would love the help as well. You also spoke about the metaverse and extended reality. Now, there are a lot of these technologies which have sort of come, and there's a feeling that they're there, but they've not really scaled. So there's the metaverse, there's extended reality, there is Web3, which came with a lot of promise, and there's a feeling that people haven't really taken advantage of it. What's your take? Like, do you feel that CMOs treat these as, okay, these were all shiny objects, they came in, they've gone, nothing to do with my business, let me move on, AI is the thing?
So I would say yes and no. I think you're absolutely right that there's, it's really interesting because when this book has been well over a year in the making, as you can imagine. And when I first began both researching it and having these conversations, those 3 topics, right? The artificial intelligence, and then extended reality, metaverse, and then Web3. Those were kind of, in some way or shape or form, they were all on a sort of equal footing, right? And what was happening very quickly, and almost right as I was having a lot of these interviews, is AI just shot above everything else, right? In terms of its adoption. And extended reality, and more specifically the metaverse, right, started to meet some resistance, some headwinds, and similar, but to a lesser extent with blockchain and Web3. So while I think somewhere around 70 to 80%, this isn't from my anecdotal, right, but from actual research, 70 to 80% of CMOs today say they are using AI. It's obviously nowhere near those levels for blockchain or for metaverse. But what they are, the CMOs I spoke with, and most of them are pretty forward thinking. 17 of the 40 plus CMOs I interviewed have been on Forbes' most influential CMOs in the world. What they're saying is that they're not waiting to see what happens in those areas. They're experimenting. They're not going all in necessarily, but they are tinkering. They're setting up pilots, scrums, right? Just to understand the technology and what its potential is, because they do believe that they don't have the luxury to sit by and wait for it all to be sorted out. And so they're experimenting, right? And they're not making huge bets. They're not saying, oh, this platform is going to be the winner and this is going to be the metaverse, but they are getting themselves, very versed with the technology and with what its potential is.
And almost all of these areas, including AI, funnily enough, have all been, I saw a lot more applications of AI in the creative space and in the production space than in most other spaces. And I know that you cover the fourth evolution of content marketing. So I think it'll be great if you just gave us like a primer into what the earlier phases were and where is marketing headed forward with content especially.
Yeah. So content marketing, it has evolved, right? It has gone through several iterations. And these are kind of the way that I frame them. I don't know if it's necessarily the way everyone would identify it, but essentially the first era of content marketing was marketed through banners and emails, urging prospects, right, to visit websites, and then that kind of turned over. Then there began to be kind of a turning over of control to consumers, right? So it wasn't as one way anymore. Consumers had more input and even control over content, and this was in the form of UGC, right? User generated content and social media. And then the third era is leveraging digital to enable a greater level of personalization, and that launched the whole notion of moving from influencers to creators. And now what we're seeing really is this fourth era it's being inspired by new technology, and that is things like what we've just been talking about, AI and virtual and augmented reality, the metaverse, and Web3, which is just making content, especially the XR and the metaverse, making it much more immersive, a much more immersive experience than it's ever been in the past.
Do you think the CMOs have accepted or are getting used to the fact that they don't have the level of control that they had over their brand content anymore? I recently saw Coca-Cola had said, you know what, I'm going to accept the street graffiti renderings of my logo. And we're going to make that part of all the other things that we do in marketing. Do you sense that there is an acceptance, or is there still a worry or a resistance among CMOs?
I think the more savvy CMOs have realized that. And honestly, I think this began with the internet, right? So this isn't new, right? Even, in the early days of the internet, the late 90s, early 2000s, they CMOs began to realize that they really can control and possibly shouldn't even want to control that relationship and the relationship between the brand and the consumer, that consumers are assuming an increasing level of control because of the interactive nature of the internet and because of social media and so forth. They're beginning to realize that they need to kind of turn over control. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't try to influence it, though, right? And they shouldn't try to direct and guide it. They don't want to just, hand over the keys and say, okay, you tell us what the brand should be. But at the same time, they just don't have the level of control that they might once have had, let's say in the heyday or the golden era of brand management in the 50s and 60s, where it was largely, broadcast networks and 30-second commercials that positioned your brand. It just isn't that simple anymore. I would say one of the areas, though, that relinquishing of control was most evident in my interviews, at least, was in influencer marketing. A lot of the CMOs that I talked to said, you know what, it was a really, really hard thing for us to do, but we're slowly realizing that we can't we can't control, nor should we want to control our influencers, right? They're influencers for a reason. They know their audiences, and we need to trust them, right? We need to trust that they understand their audience and how to connect with them, and they can represent our brand in a way that is highly relevant for their consumers, for their consumers and for the influencers' audiences. And they said, it's been very difficult, and there's been some hiccups along the way, but by and large, it's that relinquishing of control, they believe, that has really helped them succeed in the area of influencer marketing.
Well, talking about influencers and creators, I know that, it takes quite a long time to actually research a book such as this. And like you said, you'd started the process last year. But in your conversations, was the Bud Light controversy, did you feel that it had any influence at all? Were people re-looking at their creator strategies, or do you think that was just people just looked at it as an isolated, unfortunate case and moved on?
There were conversations about it, definitely. It's very timely and topical, to say the least. I would say that it was definitely, it was not regarded by the CMOs I spoke with as a kind of an unfortunate, isolated incident that, probably will never happen again. I think it was a huge warning or a red flag that, it is so critical to make sure that, again, while you can't control nor should you want to control your influencers, you have a lot of control over who you choose, right? And there's, I think, an increased focus and diligence around identifying the ones that are the best fit for your brand, the ones that you believe will represent your brand in the best light, and just making sure that that you do your due diligence, right, and you've got the right influences aligned. And then once you do, you need to kind of trust them to do their thing. One of the things that came out of the interviews, perspectives were that where Bud Light went wrong wasn't necessarily that influencer marketing is bad, but it really wasn't. They had other issues on that brand that they were trying to address through influencer marketing, and it just backfired in a bad way, right? And it was obviously a lesson hard learned.
Yeah, I think it's also a very interesting one in that there were a lot of discussions about brand purpose last year, immediately after that took place. And I think there was an element also of you have to know what your brand is or where it is today and how far do you have the elasticity to stretch it.
Right.
And how are you going to calibrate that stretching? So are you doing that over 3 years, 5 years, or are you just going to snap a finger and say, right, I'm going to be this totally different brand right now, which your audience may or may not be prepared for? So it was pretty interesting to see the intersection between brand purpose and the creator economy, because the creators might have a view of your brand which probably your equity doesn't stretch to cover right now. It might get there, but it's not there right now.
Yeah, I think one of the, again, nobody, I don't think anybody has the definitive answer on this, but a lot of the opinions were, and I do talk about this in the book, is that what Bud Light or what Anheuser-Busch or AB InBev was looking to do was to reach and increase their relevance with the new audience. And I think the question is exactly what you were getting at. Is this the right brand to do it? Should they have looked at one of their craft brands? Should they have launched a new brand, or at a minimum looked at perhaps a sub-brand, although I think that might have been a little bit tough off of Bud Light. But regardless, it probably wasn't the right brand to choose, right? And the Bud Light brand did not have, to your point, the elasticity to stretch in that direction, right? And that's why that backfired. So it wasn't even that what they did was wrong. In fact, I would argue, reaching out and being more inclusive was the right thing to do, but not with that brand, right? That brand did not have permission to go there. It's certainly not now, if ever, but certainly not now.
And one of the areas where getting control over what's getting created is harder is the whole esports and games area, which again, you cover in your book about this whole area of gamification. Any tips on what what you've seen as some really good examples of how marketers have actually used gamification, some key trends that you think are likely to succeed?
Yeah, gamification. One of the things I think that I learned from there is that it's very strategic. It's as strategic really as any other marketing activation technique. And some of the best examples of gamification that I came across were ones that were able to kind of weave this notion of story into their gamification, right? At the core of their gamification platform is a story, and the story has a challenge, right? And like a lot of good stories, and they are challenges that these brands users can kind of relate to and get behind, right? And get inspired by, and actually even feel a sense of ownership around. So some of the best examples of gamification I think that I came across were the ones or the programs that had all of those elements. They had story, they had challenge, they had ownership, they created urgency, and they were very consistent with their brand positioning, right? They came up with gamification ideas or activation that were very true to the heart of that brand.
Any examples that you liked?
I think a couple of the ones that came out that jumped out at me was Salesforce, right, in the B2B space. They have their Trailblazer program, the Trailheads, and that is one that I think they have several 100,000 members, and they are constantly pushing the envelope in terms of making of engaging their core users and challenging them and inspiring them to do more within that community, right? That just always setting the bar a little bit higher, right? And giving them more incentive. Always, again, giving them something to strive for, but not making it feel impossible, which was also another common theme, by the way. It's like you've got to strike this very subtle balance between kind of setting a bar, right, but setting it not so high that it becomes discouraging, right? You should never be able to reach that bar, right? You're always trying to strive and attain and reach a new level in the game. At the same time, you can't push it to the point where it becomes discouraging, right? And people give up.
Okay, I want to move into my favorite space now, which is data, but we have to stop here. Coming up next time on FairPlay, Mitch Duckler, author of The Future Ready Brand, will be discussing with me why CMOs are bullish on the future of blockchain.
A lot of them see blockchain as kind of this democratization, essentially, of the internet, right, of the World Wide Web, and the elimination of very powerful intermediaries like Google, like Facebook. Because of blockchain technology, Web3 will enable marketers to have a more direct relationship with consumers. Consumers will voluntarily give their digital wallet, if you will, with all of their information to the brands that they care the most about. And that can obviously, deepen relationships to a much greater extent than they are today.
This has been Fair Play with Arun Kumar. If you want to uncover the keys to using data wisely and fairly in an ever-changing world, go to arunkumar.com for more insights and resources. Fair Play is a production of Forbes Books.